Just apologies to our members at home. I think we've been muted at this end on Zoom before now. Welcome to the meeting. You'll know the protocols for participating by Zoom. Please keep your microphone off until you're asked to speak and use your virtual hand if you would like to raise your hand to speak or ask any questions. Please join me in the opening karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hia ki ana te ata kura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei Māori ora. Thank you. All right, that moves us on to apologies, and no apologies have been received, and then to public comment, and we don't seem to have any public comment. And then conflict of interest declarations. Does any member have a conflict of interest relating to any item on the agenda? I can see none. So we'll move on to agenda item 5, the update on Council's climate change work. I refer you to page 6 of your agenda and ask Ewan Schertzer, Head of Climate and Solid Waste, to speak to the item. Welcome, Ewan.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have anything to add to the paper, so I'm happy to take any questions on it.
Okay, does anyone have any questions on that particular paper? Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you, Ewan, for the report. I just noticed there was a display by Victoria University, and I wondered if the committee could be sent it at all, please. That was hosted at the library. Is it possible to have any footage or any visuals of what was displayed?
I can follow that up with Isaac, the team leader for the urban design. So I wasn't involved in this particular one, so this is just something that they made us aware of, that it took place in the War Memorial Library. So happy to share anything that is available in terms of footage or photos.
Appreciated, thank you.
Councillor Edwards.
Yep, thank you. Great report, Ewan. Just a couple of questions I had. It was really great news that the EGA has put in 100 grand for the heating change at Mackenzie Pool, and I see that, I read that that's going to result in greenhouse gas emissions of a similar amount to we achieved putting a cover on that pool. And the question occurred to me, do we have plans to put a cover on Eastbourne Pool, or do we already have a cover there?
There is already one there.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
And my other question was relating to EVs, and there's probably a good reason for it, but it doesn't immediately occur to me, why the charging stations at the marina are not allowed to be used by members of the general public.
So the marina AC charging stations were put in the car park that is available for marina users and berth holders, and that is located behind the gate. So that's a gate that's only accessible to marina members, hence why they are restricted to those users and their visitors rather than the general public. But the 2 DC charging units are outside the gate, and they're obviously publicly available.
Right.
So this is an arrangement that the Seaview Marina has entered into with Meridian in terms of the berth holders and users of the marina.
But presumably marina funds, considerable marina funds were used to install those charging units?
No, Meridian fully funded the installation of those charging stations. So that's an agreement that they've come to with Meridian, and they're just operating them on a commercial basis, but on the marina side.
That's great. Thank you.
Councillor Shaw.
Thanks, Ewan. Also a question on the EV stations. I note on page 9 that Fraser Park Sportsville and Days Bay are not listed.
Yes, that's correct. So the Rico Sorts Centre had already been fitted with AC charging stations. So Meridian Energy has since swapped them out for their own units to make them smart and inverted commas so that they can be managed remotely. So they haven't, the total number hasn't actually changed. It's just a different type of unit that is now there. Days Bay is something that Meridian, again, installed as part of their own Zero network. Council assisted in terms of traffic resolutions and getting it in, but it didn't involve any direct council funds as part of the DC charging project that we currently are working on.
And my second question is about on page 26 in regards to the charities exemption. The report suggests that there were some charities that there were no contact for, and has there been a follow-up for those ones that you have no contact for?
Councillor Shaw, that's a subsequent paper. I think we're on the climate change one here. We can address that in the next paper. Yeah, Ewan, I was going to make a comment, but I'll flip it into a question as well, because I was going to note the very good progress that we're making in decarbonising our own vehicle fleet compared to some government agencies. And a question I have, because we're also making good progress, as we've just discussed, on rolling out our EV charger network, and whether there's any statistics available on how we're doing compared to other councils or other territories in terms of providing EV chargers.
There isn't any good statistics or a leaderboard, if that's what you're asking. I mean, there are sites like EROM, which is run by NZTA, that lists all the DC and AC chargings that comply with the NZTA guidance. Based on that, I would say that once we have rolled out this project, then Lower Hutt will probably be one of the best service communities in terms of fast charging or medium speed charging. Just because, you know, within 3 to 4 kilometres of each resident, there will be at least a couple of those units. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can point to that says that this is where we are in terms of the best service communities, but it will be right on top, I would say.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brown.
Now that you've got them around the region, will you be measuring their use? Can you measure their use? And if you find there's unders or overs, would you consider changing them, or this is the baseline and you just plan on building on it?
Yes, absolutely. So we will have good stats, and we're already getting some stats through in terms of the usage of the ones that have been installed. It's at the Marina and Stokes Valley. So we will be able to monitor and see whether usage is good or could be better. In terms of changing what is there, I guess I see it as a baseline, given the really high costs for changing or installing units. What goes in is basically, this is what it is for now. And obviously, if use is better, then we can look at other new opportunities. If use is lower than expected, then we can look at promoting it more, or we may just have to wait for EV uptake to catch up to fill that demand.
All right, were there any further questions on this climate change work paper? No, in that case, I am happy to move the recommendation myself that the committee notes the update on various climate change work streams, and also notes the officer's submission on the draft National Adaptation Plan attached as Appendix 2 to the report. As explained in the paper, there was a very tight time frame for getting that one in, so it was done by officers instead of coming before a committee. Is there anyone who would like to second the recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Brown. Anyone who would like to discuss? No, well, I already made my comment, Ewan, which was to congratulate you on the rapid progress that is being made in those particular areas, and in fact everything in the report. So thank you very much. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. And those against, no. I declare the motion carried. And that moves us on to agenda item 6, update on Council's solid waste and waste minimisation work. I refer you to page 25 of your agenda. And Bruce Hodgins, Strategic Advisor, is going to be joining you in to speak to this item. I believe they have a presentation.
We have prepared a presentation which is just being shared. So as part of that committee paper, we thought it would be timely just to give a brief update on, in terms of where the service has come from, how we've gone, and also briefly comment on an appraisal that was carried out over the last 6 months to look at some opportunities for improving the service as it is. And it's a separate piece of work to the post-implementation review that has been flagged in the past 12 months after the service has been put in place. So I've got Bruce Hodgins with me on this one, and I'll just kick it off and I'll hand over to Bruce in a second. So just a brief recap to look at, where it all started. So you will remind yourself on the time frame that this whole work started on. So in August 2017, we passed the Waste Minimisation Management Plan. We went through a business case process. Council agreed on the options for consultation on the new service. We then consulted with the community, and then Council made a decision in September 2020, and then it was followed by implementation. And between November and May, we carried out a post-implementation appraisal just to look at, where we might see some opportunities for improvement. But that piece of work is separate from two things that are yet to come. One of them is the one-year implementation review, which is really just kicking off now, and that's also been flagged in the committee paper in front of you. And also separate to that, a food waste options and business case that's also going to be run in parallel to advise Council on options for food waste management, collections and processing. The implementation appraisal, I'll just hand over to Bruce in a minute. The purpose was really to identify any operational issues and opportunities and recommend changes and improvements to better ensure that strategic waste objectives can be achieved. So it was really looking at the early learnings that we were getting from the new service to see what opportunities we could look at for improving it. And we covered 5 different areas. One of them was green waste, the low waste users, multi-unit dwellings, looking at the customer experience and how does the customer interact with us and how we are delivering the services. So I'll just hand over to Bruce to continue from here.
Thanks, Ewan. Just to add to that, we kicked this off late last year, and we included 9 different people from the organisation, across the organisation, that could input in different ways to this appraisal. We didn't call it a full review. The review's happening after 12 months. So this is an in-house exercise to really have a look at how we performed, see what the main issues were, and particularly to have a look at where we could make immediate improvements or look to make immediate improvements. So the first thing that we identified was there were a number of issues that came through with the implementation, and those we've highlighted there. Clearly, shipping delays caused us headaches in terms of getting the bins out at the right time, but we had a plan in place and we were able to deal with that issue. But internally, there was a number of points: the capture and maintaining of the data, the staffing resource that we needed to actually action these requests. So these are the sorts of things that we identified as critical in terms of having an impact on the way the implementation occurred. We hadn't fully appreciated the number of bits of data and the number of calls that came through and the changes that occurred. Whilst we had 2/3 of people registered and said, yes, this is the bin we wanted, that 1/3 was a large number of people that we still didn't fully appreciate that wanted maybe changes. So it was, I suppose that was the main learning, the amount of resource that we applied to this project and the amount of time we had to deliver it. In the end, we had a very short time frame between the time that Council approved in September and the delivery on the 1st of July the following year. 9 months was very tight. We can move to the next one. So the first area that we've looked at is the green waste, and the purpose of having a green waste service was to complement what was already in the marketplace, to try and increase the amount of green waste that was being taken to landfill. And we think that in the short term, we have done a pretty good job in achieving that aim. So over 5,000 residents signed up to the council offer, as well as the Waste Management has its own offer, which combined meant that we've added quite a number to the overall plan. So what we identified in the beginning was that there was some confusion by residents regarding collection days, weeks. When it was a monthly pickup or a 4-weekly pickup, it was very difficult maybe for people to recall which day and which week it was that was their turn. And so there was some improved information that helped with that. And I think as time went on, people became more used to the fact that it was their week. As part of the review, as part of the appraisal, we said we don't want to make any changes at this point. We think that should be part of the full review after 12 months of the service running. And so that is going to be part of the full review. Right at the beginning, we talked about how we could incentivise low waste users, and as part of the appraisal, right at the very part of the beginning of that work, we fed into the annual plan process, and the one thing that we could do was set the rate at a similar or the same rate that has been for the past 12 months. And so whilst the other services did get an increase relating to the cost of living increase, around 6%, we were able to hold this at the $105 a year rate. And when you compare that to what the market rate is charged now in neighbouring cities, it is a considerable saving compared to what the market is providing. So I think in many respects we have met that one. Multi-unit dwellings was an area that we needed to have a good look at. When we did a sample of MUDs, and we found that there were quite a variation between what those MUDs were getting in terms of their service and the amount that they were paying. And so what we've done is we've gone through and reviewed all of that, reassessed all of that, and that's going to feed into a process for the next annual plan at looking at what the charges might be for MUDs, because at the moment there are some winners and losers, and so it's how can we make that more equitable. And so there's a little bit of work that's going through at the moment, and that will feed into the annual plan or the LTP variation. Customer experience was a major issue that we wanted to have a look at, because we still felt that the council systems that we were operating were quite clunky in some ways. And we were aware that the Customer Service Excellence Project will address many of those systematic problems, but they will take some time, probably 2 to 3 years. So what we were looking at is what can we do over the next few months, year, to improve the service that is provided to customers. So there's a few things. The first one is we're piloting a modern customer ticketing system, and the team is working on that at the moment, I believe, to support management of customer queries. It allows centralised management of customer queries, automated workflows and comprehensive reporting. So we're looking at how we can pilot that with the rubbish and recycling service. We looked at increasing the first point of resolution capability within the contact centre, so that people can get their issues resolved, and looking at greater integration between waste management operational systems and our customer service processes so that they're better aligned. So they were the main 3 things that we're looking at. I'm going to hand back to you now.
Yeah, so another issue that was considered is around the reporting on key KPIs, and there's clearly some more work to do in terms of incorporating performance reporting into our quarterly performance reports, although some of this some of the statistics that we are collecting is obviously coming to this committee as well. And to give you some examples, and that's also covered in the committee paper, looking at the some of the highlights, I guess. One of them is the curbside collection volume. So that's the mixed recycling and glass, pre and post service change. The orange in the graph on the screen is the previous curbside service. So that's an average over the last 3 years for that particular month. And the reason why we've used the average of the last 3 years is because 2020 obviously was a bit of an outlier year around COVID. So we just tried to make sure we get an accurate picture of what the past looked like. And the blue bars are the current curbside service. So we don't, we've just received the data for June, but it was too late to include it in this report. And it's also slightly above the previous years. So it's about a 25% increase in terms of recycling collected from the curbside. When you take into account the optional green waste collection for the 5,200 households or so, you basically, that results in a 50% increase in material diverted. So it's the curbside collection, recycling glass, and the optional green waste. And that's shown in the blue and green bars compared to the previous curbside on orange. So in total, and especially if you take into account another change we made, you may recall we stopped using green waste material at the landfill for cover material since July last year, so the same time that we actually made the curbside change. So if you take that into account, over the whole year, we're now diverting an additional 4,800 tonnes of material that previously would have gone into the landfill. So I think that's a pretty good result. So any changes that council might want to make in the future around food waste would obviously be additional to that. And then finally, the electric trucks. So we've now got 11 out of the 22 trucks are electric. We didn't quite get there right from the get-go. So we started, I think, with 4 or 5 on day one, and then we phased in, or Waste Management phased in the remaining trucks so we could reach 50%. I think it was April or May when we had the last one come in. And so the next phase of the work is obviously to get all trucks electric by 2024. And at this stage, we're still on track for that. So those are the big side loaders that are coming up next. So that's what we had prepared. If there's any questions on this particular presentation before perhaps we go to the committee paper, then I'm happy to take this, including Bruce.
Mayor Barry.
Thank you, and thank you for the work that you've done in reviewing and looking at how these processes happened and the rollout. Just wondering, Bruce, from your perspective, how many years have you been here for again? Sorry to make you
Older than you.
Oh, that's right. So for some time. Yeah. But I was just wanting to know from your perspective, with the scale of this change that we brought in, how this compares to other, from being here for some time, how that compares to other initiatives or changes that the council has made. How would you compare that?
Easily, this was by far the largest change that we had implemented, and the number of people that were involved in it across the organisation was a very large number, and I think that was part and parcel about maybe underestimating the amount of resource that was going to be required to successfully, I suppose, respond to customers quickly. So yeah, this would be by far the biggest that I've been involved with.
And I think I suppose it's a comment that the largest change and certainly likes of 30 odd years where you have been here, but also doing that at a time of COVID with the challenges that brings. I mean, do you have any sort of looking back now that your perspective across that with the wider environment and what we're in?
Yes, if we had our time again, I would have said to council, we should implement this in a 12-month period, not in a 9-month period, and pro rata the rate for the year, kicking it off on 1st of October, because implementing it in the time we had just put a lot of pressure both on us and Waste Management. Waste Management also had, very tight timeframes to get vehicles and their processes in place. So for me, that would be the number one thing, and looking at some critical positions, I suppose, in terms of managing the data that we had was another area that I would change if I could go back.
Thanks. Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Bruce and Ewan, for the report. In the review, you've said that the interface is an area that needs to be worked on. I think in Wainui-a-Mata, we probably experienced the worst of the initial rollout, and I've been in touch with many residents in that time, and there's almost no residents that are unhappy with the service now. They're all happy with the service, but where it still stays problematic is at that interface of ringing the contact centre, wanting a change, and in the transition to waste management, they're often getting lost. So and hopefully what you're bringing in, when it's put on the report a problem, it's good. There's no problem there. That's a good solution because you get that code. So people can always go back with the code, but if they haven't got the code, then it often gets lost. But the actual service has been really great, and people are enjoying it. But yeah, have you got any comment to make about that interface, if that's going to change soon?
Yeah, so that really is related to that communication between us and Waste Management, and Bruce just alluded to this trial of this ticketing system, which we're looking at to trial in the next few weeks. And that's really trying to get it clear, something is inputted and then someone is accountable for closing it out. Yeah. And unfortunately, that's kind of where it's still falling down, is that there's a breakdown in communication on particular tickets, and then we get asked the question, we don't know the answer, or we think it's got closed, but it actually hasn't. And that's where the frustration comes from customers, and that's totally understandable, and that's where we need to lift our game.
The second question is, once we go through the food waste options or trials, will it be considered to change the regularity of delivery? Like I know in other main centres, waste is collected weekly and rubbish fortnightly and recycling fortnightly.
That's something that we would that's very likely something that we would look at, but I don't know what the impact might be yet. So that's a bit early. At the first stage is coming to the committee paper, is really the long list of options around food waste, to shortlist those that we think are feasible, and also engage council, you guys, on this when the time comes, and then look at the implications of, okay, well, if there is a service rolled out, what does that mean for the refuse collection? Not so much for the recycling service, but certainly the refuse part, I would expect there may well be some changes, but that's further down the track.
Councillor Shaw, did you have another question? Could I just get you to straighten up your microphone before you ask it too? Thank you.
Another question, it's the same one that I put in before, and it's in regards to charities, just on page 26. So there were a number of charities, 21 it says here, that didn't respond. Will we actually follow those up? There seem to be a large number.
Yes, we have already twice, and there is a small number that actually aren't necessarily charities, so they may not, it might not apply to them, so they may not apply. But we have already followed up, and we will continue to do that. But it's ultimately up to them to make the application if that's what they want to do.
Yeah. My second question is around the Stokes Valley Food Bank, are based out of a church hall in Stokes Valley. And they have a lot of trouble getting rid of the number of cardboard boxes they get with the food deliveries that come in. So they get a recycling bin. Would it be in their better interest to register as a charity and claim some exemptions, or what might be the best course of action for this particular group?
I can't comment on their particular circumstances, so it's probably best if they contact our West team. But effectively, if it's a property that's in the ratings, if they are the owner of a property that's rated in the system as community education, for example, then they would be eligible to opt in to the curbside service. If they're just if they're just renting the space, then they may not be able to do that. If they're a charity, then they could apply for the exemption to the landfill. So it really depends on what their circumstances are.
I believe they're not renting, they're using a church hall, which does allow them to receive a recycling bin, but the bin is not big enough for what's coming in on a weekly basis.
I would recommend they just get in touch, send us a message, and we can look into it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We seem to have veered away from the presentation, but Councillor Edwards, was your question regarding the presentation or something else in the paper?
No, I took it we were now on to the main report, so I'll hold it if you wish.
I think Bruce might have had, did you have further comments to the rest of the report? Okay, happy to take questions on the rest of the report, starting with Councillor Edwards, then Councillor Brown.
Thank you. My questions relate to this frustrating level of contamination. And I'm just my first question is, I seem to remember talk that when there is a high level of contamination, it can result in entire truckloads of recyclables going to the landfill. Are we seeing that, Bruce? And in what circumstances? I'm actually trying to work out how that would actually occur.
I can answer that. So at this stage, there haven't been any loads going to landfill. The scoop tests apply to particular loads, so they're not testing every truck that comes into the landfill, but on a monthly basis there is 16 tests per month, and if a particular load is well over 20%, then they have the option of taking it to landfill. So far that hasn't occurred yet, but overall we are skirting pretty close to that threshold. And that's why we're doing this work to reduce contamination.
Cool. And trying to put myself in mind with people who are putting general rubbish and organic waste and nappies in a recycling bin, a percentage of those people will be bloody minded or whatever you want to say. But there might, as it occurred to me, there might also be quite a number, particularly people who rent their property, who have found that their rubbish bin is too small. And so they fill up their rubbish bin and then, they've got more rubbish and they're just tempted to put it in with recycling. Have we got any plans, or do officers see any way of, I don't know, I'm just thinking of some sort of, as we do this education campaign, having a short amnesty period where we sort of have some publicity advising renters that if they're finding that their landlord, the bin that their landlord ordered for them is too small, to, get in contact with them and try and work something out, because from now on, we're going to be hardline, there's going to be stickers on bins, there's going to be recycling bins taken or whatever. I'm just wondering whether you see any scope for that to be part of a campaign.
So we are taking a reasonable, lenient approach at the moment. So at the moment, we are stickering bins with the stickers in the appendix. Just don't want to, if you want to have a look at appendix 1 to 3, it has these examples of the stickers that are out there.
Yep.
And it really is, as the statistics show, it's about 9% of the bins that are problematic, and the rest is actually fine. So which confirms our theory that it's actually a small number of households that, contribute to that problem. Now, we are taking a lenient approach in the sense that we are stickering, and no one's taking any bins away, But we are basically, the contractor has been instructed to not empty a bin if it is severely contaminated, because we can't have that end up in the processing plant. So with that sticker advising residents that, look, we really need you to change your behavior, otherwise your bin won't be emptied, we think that's a pretty strong incentive for them to change that behavior. Whether or not there is a link to the property having a small bin for refuse, that's something we could look at. We certainly don't have any stats on this at the moment, whether there is a correlation. We can look into that.
I think it would be good to have those stats, and I just wonder to myself, just returning to the renting situation, I just wonder where there are some people who rent who feel a bit powerless in this whole process. I mean, their landlord ordered them the bin. They know to upgrade the bin, you know, it's quite expensive to upgrade the bin to a bigger bin, and they might feel caught. Something I'd like officers to take a look at anyway. Thanks.
Councillor Brown, did you have another question?
I've got two questions. The first is the charities, it's Upper Hutt and Lower Hutt. So for the 12 and Upper Hutt, obviously there's a cost to covering that. Does Upper Hutt fund that?
No, Upper Hutt doesn't fund the estimated cost for the charities located in Upper Hutt. That's a decision that we made at the time, and it was just too difficult to look into that. So basically, because we've always had that exemption, whether it's, in fact, it was available to any charity, not just for Lower Hutt or Upper Hutt, until we restricted it a little bit last year. It's only a small number, so I don't think it's a significant cost. So for simplicity, it's easier just to leave it as it is for now.
And that was a committee decision, wasn't it, Ewan?
Council decision, yeah.
Yeah. So in regards to reporting, is there going to be regular reporting on certain measures, like quarterly?
So we will continue with the reporting on volumes of recycling, the contamination. So basically the things that we have put into this report. And as we get more granular data, we could certainly become more granular. So that I expect that to continue, and certainly the reports against the KPIs that we have in terms of recycling volumes, that absolutely will continue. So if there's any particular things you're interested in, we can look into that.
Just a couple of questions from me, Ewan, and sorry for jumping around a bit in the agenda. I'm just coming back to those charities and discounts for charities, and you talked about how all of the charities who had previously used the service had been contacted and notified of the changes going forward. I was just wondering how we will promote that service to charities who have never used the service before, and let them know that it's available to them as well.
So there was as part of the annual plan publication, there was a press release by council that actually specifically alerted to that exemption being available to charities. So that was one part, and the second aspect to that is that we will have hopefully very soon a little section on the website that alerts to that, so we can point people to that part to see what's available for not-for-profits, non-charities, those sort of types of organisations.
That'll be great, and I think once it is on the website, if we maybe do some social media around that as well. And then my other question was regarding the food waste investigation, and there's a timeline there on page 27 which ends with a final report in May 2023. I was just wondering when we might be likely to enact something with the report coming in that day, in that time. Would that likely be in the next financial year or the following one after that?
So the time frame for the food waste work really has been designed with the next long-term plan in mind. So if you work backwards from having a long-term plan in place by 1st July 2024, the consultation before that, the planning work that needs to go to design the plan, then we really need to have key decisions made by council later during 2023. So hence the final report, if that's due in May, then it gives us a few more months to then, for you guys to consider whether or not you would like to put this into the mix for the next long-term plan. If that's the case, then it could probably be, it would be put in place by 1st July 2024, and that would leave another 12 months, coming back to Bruce's comments about if there was a service to be introduced, let's make sure we give ourselves sufficient time, because rolling out a food waste collection certainly could be of a similar scale to the change that we've just had. So we just want to be cognizant that we need to plan this well in advance. So hence, it's basically a 3-year project.
Yeah,
And
thank
this
you
is just
very
the first
much.
part of it.
Yep. Any other questions, folks? No, in that case, I'm happy to again move the recommendation that the committee notes the update on various solid waste management and minimisation matters. Could I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Shaw, thank you very much. Is there any member who would like to speak to the motion? Councillor Shaw.
So much has happened in the past year in this space, and so you've done a fantastic job to divert 4,800 tonnes from the tip. I think that's a fantastic measure for us to score, and I think there's lots of other wins as well too. I think the low waste users that we've been able to put in a cost-effective system for them is really appreciated by those people. And my 96-year-old father is very complimentary of the assisted service. In fact, every Monday, they really look forward to that day because they get a big cherry wave from the guy who moves their bins around. So thank you very much for a fantastic service that you do.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. We've got Councillor Brown and then Councillor Briggs.
Thank you. Yeah, it has been, it's been a massive change, and the amount of recycling that used to run down the street every time there was a little bit of wind, or even not wind, in those little green bins is such a big turnaround. And people do feedback that they feel that this is an operational way in their family that they can contribute to a better environment. So it has had really positive effects. The next stage is getting the recycling contamination down. It would have been great if the education program had been in a little bit earlier, as it's behaviour change, and we, to get the behaviour change right from the get-go would be great. But it's a massive program of work. In Christchurch, with their population, they've removed 1,300 bins and only given back 279. So there is a group of people clearly that just will not change, and I don't think that's going to be too different from us either. And I really look forward to that interface getting a little bit tighter, because it's been such a big volume of work, a big change, as Bruce said. It's the biggest that we've done. Just those little things now for us to be really good, and also really want to commend the drivers. I often sort of make it my business to go out and talk to them, and they go beyond for people. So yeah, I really want to congratulate everyone involved.
Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for my voice as well. Thank you, officers, for the report and presentation. Just a couple extra points as well. Thanks, Bruce, for letting us know, as well as during the draft agenda meeting and the presentation today, that from a cost efficiency point of view, we're actually enabling our residents to have a high quality service at a good price, particularly with the rising costs of services in neighbouring cities. Additionally, I was at a community meeting the other week, and some residents raised with me around the recycling system, and I was bracing myself for some negative feedback, which wasn't the case at all. They were loving the system, but also wanted to let me know that they've been acknowledged for being a recycling champion as part of the sticker they received on their bin. And it was a reminder to me as well that we need to keep reinforcing the positive behaviours, as well as targeting those that are putting waste into their recycling and creating contamination. So as long as we're doing both of those two things, we want to retain everyone that's recycling well, and slowly start moving that bar. and reducing that contamination. And I acknowledge Councillor Brown's points that some people in our community, no matter how much information they get, still may choose to contaminate. And if they consistently do that, we need to make sure that we're enforcing it strongly as well. The last thing I want to touch on in this report as well is that, as Councillor Shaw noted, a significant amount of diversion of waste from the Silverstream landfill, saving our ratepayers a heck of a lot of funds over a long period of time. The longer we can make the Silverstream landfill work for us, every single tonne being diverted is a tonne saved and money saved for everyone involved. So thank you to the officers for continually coming back to us with good data. And to Ewan's question, I think the more granular we can get over the coming months to have the best systems in place, the best data in place. If the future council decides to implement new services around food waste, which hopefully it does, then we've got all the systems in place then to kind of keep it streamlined rather than having to add more and more data once the new services come on board.
Thank you, Councillor Briggs. Are there any further comment, Mayor Barry?
I suppose it feels like quite an important reflection time of the decision to implement the service now that we have done this analysis and got some good figures back on the changes that it's been able to make. And I want to take us back to 2020 and early 2021 when the decisions and then the rollout and the preparing was being made on this. And I just want to acknowledge again the courageous decision that was made by this council. I think no one, well, most certainly wouldn't go back on what we used to have. And also we wouldn't go in a position where maybe we would do a halfway house and cause other problems for ourselves. And I just want to highlight that because it was a courageous decision. There was a pretty interesting time post that decision. And also the rollout certainly had its bumps. But it's important to recognise that because those are the types of decisions we should always be making on behalf of our city and on behalf of our ratepayers. And to see that an additional 4,800 tonnes has been avoided of going to our landfill is obviously a huge reason and a huge achievement for this change that we've been able to make in our goal of sending as little as possible to Silverstream landfill. So again, I just want to thank everyone for their work. I just want to thank you for the genuine acknowledgements of the challenges and the issues from the team as well, because we all know it hasn't been perfect. But I really look forward to continuing to improve this service because, of course, we know this is only, we're only halfway on the journey. There's still a long way to go if we are to reduce what we send to landfill and become as sustainable as possible in our households and in our community. So well done, everyone.
Thank you. And without wanting to repeat too much of what's already been seen, certainly like to speak to those gains that we've seen in the first year, and those are significant gains. And they also show what can be achieved by a change, a very complex change, but in one way, but very simple in another, to a universal and easy to use collection system for all our residents, is what's seen those gains to date. And from here on in, education is key. And we know that contamination is a problem. We've been finding the wrong things in our recycling bins, and we need to keep them out of there. The other part of the education, of course, is to make sure that all the right things are being put in there, because there's probably recyclable items still going to landfill because they've been put in the wrong bins as well. And we've seen that prior to the change in audits that have been commissioned of the contents of bins. And I'd certainly like to see a comparison of that in future, and education to, really make sure that we're capturing as much of the reusable resources as we can through that curbside recycling system. But yeah, very exciting progress to date. So the motion has been moved and seconded. I will put the motion now. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, no. And I declare that motion carried. Next, we're going to be looking at the submission on the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity Exposure Draft. We had a briefing on this yesterday, and I refer you to page 2 of the supplementary agenda, which was provided to us today. And before I ask Kate and Chris to speak to that, we just have one small correction from Helen.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I've made an error on paragraph 42 of the report where I have written annual plan 2022-23 and it should be the annual plan 2023-24. If that could be noted, thank you.
Thank you, Helen. And I'll ask Kate Pascal, Policy Planning Manager, and Chris Page, Intermediate Policy Planner, both of whom are on Zoom, to join us and please introduce the item.
Kia ora, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity. This submission, as you heard at the briefing yesterday, is on the draft national policy statement for Indigenous biodiversity. We have taken on board the comments and concerns raised by councillors yesterday on the draft submission that we circulated, and that has been updated for you. So hopefully you have had an opportunity to review that, and I don't have anything further to add to the paper, so I'm happy to take questions.
Councillor Briggs.
Sorry, just wanted to check in, Chair. Kate, we can't actually see you. I think you're sitting back maybe too far from your camera. We can just see your virtual background.
Thank you, Councillor Briggs. We know you're there, Kate, because we can hear you loud and clear, but we can just see your background and not your face.
You still can't see me.
No.
Oh, my apologies.
Never encountered that one before. Did anyone have a question regarding the submission? Okay, we are of course able to make any suggestions too before we move on with it. And I just had one myself, and acknowledge the officers and thank them for changes that have been made since our briefing yesterday. And for me, in point 2, which was about a pragmatic approach to mapping, and the final sentence there, we suggest that the NPSIB includes provision for adjustment of SNA boundaries in circumstances where a very small portion of the SNA falls within a property. I mentioned in the briefing how I feel this could open us up to a bit of challenge from people who might like a small portion removed, and I guess I'm happy to support the statement there. However, I think there would have to be a very clear and robust definition in the national policy statement of what could be excluded. So it might be a particular area of square meters or something like that, just to make it very clear cut that it's not something that people can kind of lean on their council and hope for a bit of flexibility to remove a SNA on their property. So it's just a small amendment to what's written there, just that the NPS itself makes it very clear what the circumstances are that a small section might be removed. Did anyone else have any comment or suggestion? Okay, in that case, oh, sorry, Councillor Edwards.
Look, I just wanted to congratulate officers on the submission. I reckon it's a really good one, done in a hurry, done unfortunately, as is mentioned and now highlighted in our submission, without much chance for our residents to have input, even though they're the ones that are going to be directly affected. And I'd just like to express the wish in open meeting that that the officials that are sort of looking at these submissions pay, I'm just hopeful they'll pay particular attention to our suggestion that they need to look again at exceptions for what are reasonable and small activities on those sites. I don't need to tell any councillors in this room what a massive fight this was in a previous triennium over CNAs, with landowners asserting their property rights, and we no doubt will be facing the same thing. And I just think that if officials aren't prepared to just show a little bit of reasonableness in terms of things like trimming vegetation and being able to have a clear space around buildings and so on, we're just making it much tougher for ourselves, even though pretty much all New Zealanders are very interested in protecting Indigenous vegetation. I think we can be a bit reasonable about it. So just to thank you very much for work on this submission.
Thank you. So I will move the recommendations that the committee receives the report, approves the submission on the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity Exposure Draft as attached as Appendix 1, agrees to delegate authority to the Chair and Deputy Chair of the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee, along with the Chief Executive, to finalise the submission consistent with discussions and any amendments made by the committee today. And finally, notes that the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee has performed the responsibilities of the Policy, Finance and Strategy Committee in accordance with its terms of reference so that the matter can be discussed, considered in a timely manner. It's due next week. Is there anyone who would like to second that motion, please? Thank you, Councillor Edwards. And anyone who would like to speak to the motion? Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's really important that we do get this submission in. As Councillor Edwards alluded to, last triennium, there's a number of residents in our city that voiced their opinions around, particularly around SNAs, but biodiversity in general. And I think that the workshop yesterday was really useful to kind of get those few tweaks in place. And I do support the submission as it stands. One of the questions I asked yesterday was around engagement with residents that we've had relationships with since the SNA's last triennium. Just a request to officers, if we do have any contact details, just to get in touch with them directly and encourage them to do a submission as well, knowing it is a very short time frame, but the time frames aren't ours, they're government's. And I think the more that we can empower people to make submissions when government policy will be impacting their day-to-day lives, then that's kind of a conjoint role that we can do as part of this process as well. But as I said, Chair, has my full support today. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to speak to the motion? Well, I will. Just briefly, it's coming up to 5 years since the Minister for Conservation acknowledged a biodiversity crisis with almost 4,000 native species threatened or at risk of extinction in New Zealand. Like other crises to do with housing and climate change and the cost of living, this is a global one. We're not alone. And like other crises, this calls for significant action, which is signalled in the draft MPSIB. We all acknowledge, I'm sure, that the protection of areas of significant Indigenous vegetation and significant habitats of Indigenous fauna has been fraught. But this was embedded as a matter of national importance in the Resource Management Act from its inception in 1991, the same year Amir was born. And it has yet to be effectively enacted here in Lower Hutt. This revised MPSIB makes the process for identifying and protecting significant natural areas clearer and degrees fairer for public and private landowners. And our submission proposes further improvements, so we thank officers for those. Our council will need to work closely and carefully with Lower Hutt landowners to enact that part of the plan. There's a lot else in this plan which we should celebrate and look forward to, including a requirement for coordinated restoration of nature and bottom lines for Indigenous vegetation cover in urban areas, which, like so many other things, is inequitable across our city, representing the kind of ecological fragmentation this MPS seeks to halt and reverse. Increasing vegetation coverage in areas which are ecologically impoverished is not just beneficial for nature, with the myriad ecological services that native trees and plants provide, but it adds multiple benefits in terms of providing fresh air and shade, contributing to stormwater control, adding amenity value, increasing property values, improving mental health, and so much more. So I look forward to this council taking a more focused and active role in not just monitoring and protecting nature in our hill reserves, but regreening urban spaces, parks and streetscapes in every neighbourhood of Lower Hutt. And just to note too, and echo Councillor Briggs's comments, encouraging individuals to submit, as with our Three Waters submission earlier this week. Certainly encourage residents to submit to the government directly, particularly if they have views different to those expressed in council's submission, and they can do that through the Ministry for the Environment website by the 21st of July. So with that, I will put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. And any against, please say no. I declare the motion carried. Thank you. Thank you, Kate and Chris.
Thank you.
Our final agenda item is an information item back in the main agenda on page 38, the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee Forward Programme for 2022. Does any member have a question regarding the items or timings of the items? No. In that case, I'm happy to move the forward program for 2022. Could I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Shaw, thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Any against, please say no. I declare that motion carried. So we are up to questions, and I have received no questions. We'll just wait for the closing karakia to be shown on the screen. Please join me. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia i te uru tapanui. Kia wātea, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua i te ara takatū. Koiara e rongo, whakairihia ake ki runga, kia wātea, ai rā, kua wātea, hau pai mārere. And before we close the meeting, I think the Chief Executive would like to make a comment.
Oh, thank you, Chair. And if I may be so bold to say thank you for stepping in and doing the 2 chairings you've done this week with aplomb. Obviously, it's Helen's last committee before she goes off to look after her family for a year. So I know we've said that a couple of times, but just want to acknowledge that today. So good luck to you, Helen, but we know we'll see you around, and we're all very worried about bellbirds takings going down over the next 12 months. So we'll have to do what we can. And I've mentioned to you, Alison's here. The other thing I wanted to let you know is that he pirongo imua ina poti, my pre-election report will be emailed to you in the next 5 minutes. This is a statutory report that I produce, and I will have hard copies available next week. You will be getting it, and then I'll do there's a media release going shortly afterwards. I'm very happy to take feedback on it, and also happy to go out and talk about it to people who would like to know more, because this is all about encouraging participation ahead of nominations opening tomorrow. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Joe. Mayor Barry, did you have a comment as well?
No, thank you. As the Madam Chief Executive mentioned, I just wanted to thank yourself for stepping in to chair the previous 2 meetings, just on behalf of Councillor Briggs, who's obviously virtually isolating and with COVID at the moment, and the same with Councillor Hislop. And it's good to see that they're both recovering well, but thank you for stepping in for both of them in this role, and you've chaired both meetings superbly, so thank you.
Thank you. You're all very welcome, and we'll declare this meeting closed at 3:05 p.m. Thank you.